Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. We have the weekly recap from all the top stories from this week, June 16th, 2025, all conveniently located in one particular location, right here. Hope you enjoy it. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time.
All right, lawyer.
Bryan Kohberger. Did somebody else see Bryan Kohberger outside that house? Well, a 44-year-old woman from Moscow who worked as a DoorDash delivery driver claims to have delivered food to the residents shortly before the homicides occurred. Specifically, court filings indicate that Zana Kernodle received a jack-in-the-box order from DoorDash at approximately 3:59 a.m., just minutes before the stabbing.
And
because I'm a DoorDash driver, so yeah.
you have to testify in which murder case?
Murder case with college girl.
Oh.
This woman, identified in court documents by the initials MM, expects to testify at Kohberger's upcoming trial, which is scheduled to begin with jury selection in late July and obviously really hitting the ground running in early August. Now, her testimony is anticipated to be significant because she reportedly saw the suspect, allegedly, Bryan Kohberger, near the residence during her delivery. Now, according to posts on various social media platforms, this woman claims to have parked next to Kohberger's vehicle, a white Hyundai Elantra, and made direct eye contact with him while he was allegedly looking intently at the house. Now, the woman's account aligns with other evidence in the case, including surveillance footage that captured a white Hyundai Elantra matching the make and model of Kohberger's 2015 car in the neighborhood around the time of the murders. Now, prosecutors have stated that the DoorDash delivery provides a critical timeline of events leading up to the homicide and corroborates other witnesses' testimony. Now, the driver's observations of Kohberger could serve as eyewitness evidence linking him to the crime scene, complementing other key pieces of evidence such as DNA found on the knife sheath and the scene, as well as cell phone data tracking Kohberger's movements. Now, the woman disclosed her purported involvement in the case during, guess what? Well, when she got pulled over in Pullman, Washington in 2024, and it's body cam video when she's being interviewed at the police station. Well, yeah. She mentioned to the officer that she might be called to testify in this big murder case involving the University of Idaho students. Now, her identity as the DoorDash driver was further supported by a private investigator working for the parents of the victim, Kaylee Gonzalez, who's confirmed the driver was female, and by court filings referencing her initials. Now, obviously, this development is part of a broader legal process where the prosecutors intend to seek the death penalty if Mr. Kohberger is convicted. The defense, however, is pushing to delay the trial and has raised the possibility of presenting an alternate suspect. Now, while also challenging the admissibility of certain evidence, a public hearing is scheduled for June 18th to address the defense request. That's tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen, which, as long as it's being brought to you streaming, we will bring it to you as well. Now, the DoorDash driver's testimony could be pivotal, obviously, in establishing Kohberger's presence at the crime scene, adding to the prosecution's case, which already includes physical and digital evidence. However, the reliability of her account and its impact on the trial will depend on further scrutiny during the court proceedings, i.e. cross-examination. And if you take a look at the body cam video, this little clip, she says, "I have to testify in this big hearing." And then the cop says, "So is that why you're driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol?" Something to that effect. Yeah. So clearly ripe stuff for cross-examination by the defense indeed. We'll have to wait and see, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully tomorrow at that hearing, we'll get a little more idea of whether we're going to trial at the end of July, early August, or we're going to get a continuance. And is there going to be an alternate suspect, or are they just going with general denial? It wasn't me. prove it. Frankly, that's the best defense ever sometimes. Next, let's also talk about if you want to participate in the Bryan Kohberger case, we have got a way for you to do it. That's right. A community-led initiative is seeking volunteers to assist in a search for a critical piece of evidence in the Bryan Kohberger case involving, obviously, the murder of the 4 University of Idaho students, Kayla Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle. The trial obviously is expected to begin this summer, but guess what? They're missing a key piece of evidence called the knife. Now, the volunteer effort aims to locate the weapon and support the investigation. So when is it going to be? June 21st and 22nd of this year. And it's a 35-mile area along the route between Moscow, Idaho, and Pullman, Washington, specifically Highway 95 and 195. And what's the purpose? To search for a knife potentially discarded in the area, which may be the murder weapon. The organizer, a guy by the name of Jason Jensen, who is a licensed private investigator with a 30-year experience, known for working on high-profile cases such as the Jean-Benet Ramsey case, as well as O.J. Simpson. So the missing murder weapon is a critical element in the case. I mean, not really. It's a clue, not an element. It's a piece of evidence. And anyway, Jensen believes there is a strong possibility that the knife may be found along the specified route based upon behavioral patterns observed in similar cases. I think it's in a river somewhere, but that's just me. Anyway, court documents indicate Kohberger obviously purchased the K-bar 8 months prior to the alleged murders that he committed. And Jensen theorizes that the weapon may have been discarded from a vehicle, drawing parallels to tactics used by other offenders. Now, this search offers a unique opportunity to contribute to a high-profile investigation and support the pursuit of justice. So if you got nothing to do, you just happen to be in the area between Pullman and Moscow, Idaho, drop on by. Who knows what you may find? You could make your way to the courtroom saying you found a piece of evidence. And what did you do with it next? I turned it over to the police. Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. This could be your 15 minutes of fame. Anyway, requirements. There are none. No prior experience necessary. Volunteers will receive instructions on search protocols. You just need the ability to walk and search outdoor areas, potentially in uneven terrain, and adhere to the protocols. Volunteers must follow instructions to avoid contaminating potential evidence. And like I said, they will be briefed on safety measures and evidence handling protocols before the search begins. And if a knife or other evidence is found, guess what? Volunteers are instructed to freeze the scene, retreat, and notify authorities to ensure proper processing by law enforcement. That search will be conducted in coordination with local authorities to ensure compliance and legal and investigative standards. And while not directly involved in the Kohberger case, Jason Jensen, the organizer, has extensive experience in weapon searches and high-profile investigations. And he notes that the items, like the missing knife, are often discovered by chance, increasing the importance of community participation. The search marks Jensen's first attempt to locate this specific knife, and he is optimistic about the potential impact of the efforts. And guess what? Like he says, you can play a vital role in helping closure for this tragic case, and you could be the one to make the difference. Next on the docket, Travis Decker. Look at this guy. A new wanted poster has been released in the hunt for fugitive dad Travis Decker as the frantic search for the ex-soldier suspected of murdering his 3 young daughters stretched into its 3rd week. Now, police blasted out 3 photos late yesterday to show how the 32-year-old father potentially could have altered his appearance while on the run. The digitally altered images show Decker, who authorities warn is armed and dangerous, with his unusual long hair, as well as ones where he is sporting a shaved head and 0 facial hair. Now, large-scale search crews have been scouring the remote areas in Washington state since Decker failed to return his girls to his ex-wife on May 30th. The 3 sisters, Paitlin 9, Evelyn 8, and Olivia 5, were all found dead at the campground where he was with the girls last. Anyway, the United States Marshal Service is offering a reward of up to $20,000 for information that lead to his capture. Karen Reed acquittal in her high-profile murder trial. So as you probably know, if you follow anything related to the true crime world, yesterday, June 18th, Karen Reed, the former adjunct college professor, was acquitted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and leaving the scene of a crash resulting in death in the retrial concerning the death of her then-boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe.
Defendant not guilty or guilty? So say you, Mr. Foreman? So say you all?
Now, the verdict, delivered after 4 days of jury deliberations that began back on June 13th, concluded a case that garnered obviously significant public attention through widespread social media coverage and an HBO documentary. Now, Reed was guilty of operating under the influence, which is basically a DUI. For those who aren't familiar with the case, because there's lots of people who say, I have no idea what the Karen Reed case is about. The incident occurred back in January, January 29th of 2022, when O'Keefe was found dead in this snow outside of a Canton, Massachusetts home owned by, at the time, retired police officer Bryan Albert and his wife, Nicole Albert. Prosecutors allege that Reed, while intoxicated, struck O'Keefe with her SUV after an argument and left him to die in a blizzard conditions, and died and basically had head injuries and basically hypothermia. Anyway, the cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma and hypothermia. Reed maintained her innocence, asserting she was framed by O'Keefe's police officer friends, including the Alberts and their extended family, who were at the house where his body was discovered. Now, just remember, most of that evidence didn't come in because it was prohibited this time around. Anyway, Reed and O'Keefe, who had been dating for 2 years, had been drinking at the Waterfall Bar and Grill in Canton before being invited to this after party at the Alberts home. Reed testified, I shouldn't say testified. Her testimony came in as it relates to what she told the news media, that she had dropped O'Keefe off at an after party and returned to his home. She later awoke at 4 a.m., discovered O'Keefe had not returned, drove back to find him, ultimately locating his body outside of the Albert residence. First responders reported that Reed, in a panic state, repeatedly stated that she had hit him. I hit him. Well, the retrial followed a mistrial from July of 2024, when jurors, after 5 days of deliberation on that go-around, could not reach a consensus on whether Reed intentionally killed O'Keefe. And then in the 2025 trial, which spanned 31 days of testimony, the defense, led by attorney Alan Jackson, argued that O'Keefe was beaten and attacked by a dog inside the Alberts home before being left outside. They claimed that the investigation was compromised by State Trooper Michael Proctor, who was later discharged for sending derogatory text messages about Reed, including calling her a whack job and joking about searching her phone for nude photos. Now, the defense asserted that the investigators targeted Reed as a convenient outsider to avoid scrutinizing law enforcement officers, including Bryan Albert, his wife Nicole, their nephew Chris Albert, and Nicole's sister Jennifer McCabe, all of whom testified against Reed. But the prosecutor, Hank Brennan, the special prosecutor, I should say, he was brought in as a hired gun, countered that Reed, significantly over the legal alcohol limit, backed into O'Keefe with her vehicle while dropping him off at the after party and abandoned him. Now, the prosecution described the case as straightforward, rooted in Reed's intoxication and their tumultuous relationship. Upon hearing the not guilty verdict on the murder and related charges, Reed, dressed in her little light blue suit, visibly emotional, embraced her attorney like she has many times before outside of the courtroom. Anyway, outside of the Norfolk County Superior Court, she was met by a large crowd of supporters, many wearing pink, chanting, "Karen Reed is free." In a brief press conference, she expressed gratitude to her legal team and supporters, stating that no one has fought harder for justice for John O'Keefe than I have. Kind of reminds me of the time where O.J. Simpson said he was going to go search for the real killer on every golf course in Florida, where they can't enforce basically civil judgments against anybody. Anyway, supporters attended the court regularly, praised the verdict as a triumph of the American jury system, and the Commonwealth failed its people, a lot of the supporters said, and people obviously that were thinking that Karen Reed should have been convicted of something. Anyway, some people said it was a devastating miscarriage of justice. Other people say it was a miscarriage of justice. One, because Karen Reed was ever prosecuted, or two, that she was acquitted. You just have to pick your side. Who was outraged? Anyway, needless to say, there's lots of opinions on everything. So the case obviously has a lot of significant debate about the integrity of the investigation and the influence of the public perception. Now, Reed's defense highlighted alleged bias in law enforcement, particularly Proctor's misconduct, which fueled her supporters to believe that there was in fact a cover-up. The guilty verdict on the OUI charge acknowledges that Reed was impaired that night, though it doesn't address the broader allegation of this alleged conspiracy. While Reed has been acquitted of the criminal charges relating to O'Keefe's deaths, she still may face civil liability. A wrongful death lawsuit filed by O'Keefe's family against Reed has been on hold during the criminal proceedings, but is now likely to proceed, potentially becoming a focal point of the ongoing legal saga. And as the case concludes, obviously it remains a focal point for discussion on justice, media influence, and the complexities of high-profile criminal trials, ladies and gentlemen. The polarized reaction from the Reed supporters celebrating the verdict to the Alberts and McCabe's decrying it suggests that the public discourse surrounding O'Keefe's death will persist. Wow. Do I have a lot to think about this? I have a lot to say about this. First of all, first trial, I said I would have found her not guilty because I think the prosecution messed it up. Second trial, I think Brennan did an amazing job. He did. Frankly, he masterclass on cross-examination on many, many things. And as an attorney that does trial work, you may not like him, you may not like his style. He was good. He was very, very good. Okay. And he had to pick this mess up and try to fix it. And he tried to fix it the best that he could. Obviously, it didn't go far enough to satisfy the jury. Now, remember, should we be mad at the jury? No. Okay. Now, unless we were to find out that they were all Karen Reed supporters and they lied to get on the jury panel, then we would have something to argue about, so to speak. But I'm going to assume that they were answering questions in good faith when they were giving their responses in voir dire, and they simply were not convinced. And that's the way the system works, ladies and gentlemen. I've said this before. If you don't like a particular verdict and you think somebody got a not guilty when they should not have, don't blame the defense. They're doing their job, right? Trying to raise reasonable doubt, asking questions that maybe the prosecutor didn't. And so remember, it's not the defense that won. You really have to look at it as the prosecution failed. Okay. Now, I personally, a little surprised that they only got the operating under the influence charge. I thought the second degree murder was going to be a little tougher to get. But I also think, nobody explained why you backed up at 29 miles an hour on that road and then proceeded to drive off. There's also some privileged communications that were out there that most people will never get to see and hear between the defendant, Miss Reed, who's now been acquitted, and her attorney, and specifically as it relates to statements that she made. Now, those statements may or may not come out in the civil trial. They'll certainly have to be disclosed in the discovery process, and then they'll claim privilege to those communications, frankly, which they should be. Okay. But the reality of it is, here's two things. We say this all the time. Be humble, right? There's two types of people in the world, those that are humble and those that are about to be. Bottom line. Okay. You lost. The prosecution lost. It is what it is. You got to move on. I understand you didn't get justice for John O'Keefe. I get that. But I've said it many times before. If you're looking for justice, you're not going to find it in a courthouse. Okay. Somebody always goes away unhappy when it comes down to having a jury decide. Juries are a scary beast. You never know what they'll do. I have won trials that I should have lost, lost a couple I thought I was in the game on, because you never know what that jury is going to do. Bottom line. On the defense side, if I was Karen Reed, I would be so humble. Okay. Whether you're factually innocent or there was enough doubt in the case, it doesn't really matter. I think I'd be humble. I don't think I would be out there giving interviews. I think I would move on and try to live a quiet life. And I'll be curious to see if people continue to support her in the defense of the civil case, which is a much lower burden of preponderance of the evidence, simply more likely than not. Kind of like OJ was acquitted of 2 murders, but he was found guilty by a civil jury by a much lower standard of proof. So we'll have to wait and see. Bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, whether you like it or you don't like the Karen Reed verdict, guess what? You have to respect it. The jury has spoken. The prosecution had their best shot. It wasn't enough. The defense won. I hate to say it, I know, because people have died. It's kind of like a football game, a baseball game, soccer match. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. And someone's going to be bitter, but you got to move on. Okay. But remember, next time you get jury service and you think the system is broken, try to get on that jury. Don't lie, but be honest and try to get on that jury and make sure it works. The prosecution proves the case beyond a reasonable doubt. It is every juror's oath and obligation, solemn oath and obligation, to say guilty if they prove the case. And if the prosecution fails to prove the case to each and every element of the offense, it's the defense, it's the obligation, the solemn obligation of the juror members to find the defendant not guilty. You may not like it, but it's still better than anywhere else in the world. Breaking news, all right? Let's start the sound. Hear the breaking news sound? Breaking news. What is the breaking news, you ask? Barry Morphew. Remember, he was previously charged with the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew, as it related to her disappearance back on Mother's Day in May of 2020. And then the police found her remains in a different county, Seguin County in 2023. Well, guess what? A grand jury has returned an indictment charging Barry Morphew with first-degree murder in connection with his wife, Suzanne Morphew's, like I said, and her remains were found back in October of 2023. Remember the first trial? They didn't have the remains. There was kind of, no face, no case, no body, no evidence kind of thing. Anyway, the 12th Judicial District Grand Jury returned the indictment on Wednesday, and Morphew was taken into custody, according to a news release from the district attorney's office, and he will now be extradited to the San Luis Valley for charges. Now, there's going to be a media briefing at 6 p.m. this evening. We'll see what we can do to try to bring that to everyone. Obviously, a little curious to see how it's going to work out with what's new evidence that came forward. Obviously, the body, but it's going to be curious to see what other evidence they have. So, like I said, as you may recall, Suzanne Morphew was 49 at the time. She was last seen on Mother's Day of 2020, and she lived in Maysville in Chaffee County there west of Salida, Colorado, with her husband, Barry Morphew, and their two daughters, Mallory and Macy. And when she vanished, the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office said that she went for a bike ride but never returned home. Now, remember, Barry Morphew, who was 56, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in connection with her disappearance in May of 2021. And then days before he was set to stand trial in April of 2022, all charges were dropped by when the Fremont County District Judge Ramsey Lama granted a motion filed by prosecutors that asked to dismiss the case. Now, during the preliminary hearing back in January of 2022, prosecutors with the district attorney's office said that on the afternoon of May 9th of 2020, Barry Morphew loaded a syringe for a tranquilizer dart, put his phone on airplane mode, shot his wife with the dart. He then chased her around the house until the tranquilizer took effect, according to the prosecutors. And at the time, his wife remained missing. An autopsy was done. Her remains were found in a shallow grave, and the manner of death is listed as homicide by undetermined means in the setting of butorphanol, azarphone, and metamidylene intoxication, according to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. All right, you get extra points, ladies and gentlemen, if you spell those correctly without looking at it. butorphanol, azaperone, and medetomidine, intoxication. Easy for me to say. Anyway, apparently, according to the press release, the federal, state, and local law enforcement have never stopped working towards justice for Suzanne Morphew. And that's from the district attorney, Ann Kelly. The 12th Judicial District Attorney's Office stands in solidarity with Suzanne Morphew's family and the citizens of Chaffee and Seguin counties in pursuing this grand jury indictment. So as you may recall, ladies and gentlemen, I have kept this on my desk here, the CrimeTalk desk because I really wanted to really make I think it'd be an interesting story. But this was the proceeding summary as it relates to the disbarment of Linda Stanley, the first prosecutor who tried to bring a case against Barry Morphew. Now, a lot of things will need to be cleared up here. Obviously, the question is, will his previous attorneys, Iris Itan and Drew Nielsen, will they be rejoining the Barry Morphew case? Now, that was a firm of Itan and Nielsen, but they have since disbanded. They both created separate firms. So it'll be curious to see if one or both of them come back in for the case of Barry Morphew. He'll probably be in custody sometime. I should misspoke. He'll probably be back in Colorado sometime next week for an advisement on the indictment. Now, remember, since he was indicted, he won't be entitled to a preliminary hearing. The case will be continued for an arraignment so that whomever is going to be his defense attorney gets the discovery in the case and has time to prepare adequately. I would imagine that would probably be set out maybe 4 to 6 months, depending on the information. We'll have to wait and see. Like I said, this time, will he use the public defender? Will he get court-appointed counsel? Or will he continue to have private counsel represent him? Obviously, he sold the property that he owned with his wife. I believe there was property in Ohio as well as here in Colorado that apparently has been sold, was my recollection. But if I'm wrong, I will correct that as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the breaking news. Barry Morphew indicted for the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew, that went missing on Mother's Day of 2020. All right. Now, he was charged back in May of 2021, and days before he was to stand trial in April of 2022, all charges were dropped. Now, there was a lot of mess up by the prosecution at that particular time. There were discovery violations. The judges, I guarantee you there'll be motions that saying, well, jeopardy hasn't attached, but there's going to be motions that this should not have been brought. But the key piece of evidence is going to be that there is new evidence, and that new evidence is going to be the remains of Suzanne Morphew. We'll see. Obviously, Barry Morphew is given the presumption of innocence unless and until he is convicted or pleads guilty in a court of law. And we will give him that presumption of innocence, and we will continue to bring you the facts. We're not going to come up with some crazy story that she was dragged away by some mountain lion or something to that effect. We will bring you the facts, what we can actually know, what we can prove and talk about. And we'll see where the trial goes this particular time. But once again, right here in our own backyard, the Suzanne Morphew case is back front and center. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Barry Morphew indicted for the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew, for her disappearance back on Mother's Day, May of 2021. Her remains were found in October of 2023. And remember, the first case for first-degree murder where Barry Morphew was charged were dismissed back in April of 2022. He and his daughters quickly packed up and got the heck out of Dodge, or Salida, as they say. And obviously, he was arrested, according to this information, in the great state of Arizona. Saguache. I've lived here all my life. I've heard it pronounced different ways. Saguchi, Saguache. I apologize. Anyway. Yeah, but pronounce as a Peroni, med, whatever. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the breaking news for you. There you go. You have it. Latest stuff always coming down here for you. We brought it to you. This indictment, the information was released only about less than 45 minutes ago. So now you have it better and faster than everybody else. And obviously, it will develop. We'll do our best to bring you the news conference at 6 p.m. And we'll see where this is going. I'm curious to see. Obviously, the indictment will be unsealed, so we will be able to take a look at that. I hope it's a lot more concise and less speculative than the first complaint and information that contained lots of speculation. And one of the reasons why the case was so weak, it was 122 pages long. Hopefully the prosecution has narrowed their theory down and they have the evidence to prove it, since obviously they're putting a man's liberty at jeopardy. It should be clear, concise, and they being the prosecution should be able to know what evidence they have to support their case. Now, this is a little different last time. Remember, a judge signed off on it. Judges routinely sign affidavits for arrest warrants. They do. But then when the judge looked at it in the original case, like half the stuff is not even relevant. I can't even supposed to consider it. But in this particular case, a grand jury has indicted Barry Morphew. They've listened to some evidence. Now, granted, the legal standard for an indictment is probable cause, but a reasonable person that believe that a crime was committed and that Barry Morphew had something to do with it. There you go. You've also heard the term, a grand jury prosecutor could, you've heard the saying, I'm sorry, that a grand jury could indict a ham sandwich. It's a rubber stamp. That's also possible, but I think, once again, grand jurors usually take their jobs quite seriously, and given the low standard of proof, it's necessary. And remember, the defense doesn't get to appear at the grand jury unless you have a witness in there. But even then, the attorneys can't say a word, and they cannot comment about what they heard in the grand jury. But the reality of it is a little different posture. Obviously, there's no statute of limitations when it comes to this. And so when it comes to murder, and the police always thought that Barry Morphew was their man. We'll see if they get him this time. All right. It looks like, let's take a quick look here before we go. Does he have any money left? I don't know. But yeah, he sold a house, is my understanding. He sold 2 houses. I think they own a property back in the Midwest, in like Ohio or Iowa or something to that effect, and then they house up there. So it depends on, how he spent his money. Hopefully he was frugal, so that can go to attorneys, I guess, so to speak. Hey, Barry, you got a bunch of dough. Call me. Call the office. Shoot me an email here at CrimeTalk. You wouldn't be the first one in Colorado. We got lots of inquiries during the Watts trial as well. You just got to be able to afford us. That's what it comes down to. All right. Anyway, yes, Mama Pink, good question. Are the daughters going to be standing by him? Remember, they were very supportive of their father last time. They were there when he walked out of jail. They were there when the charges were dismissed, and they have, as far as I know, are still standing behind him, unless there's some new information. Always makes it a little interesting nonetheless, but yeah. We'll have to wait and see, ladies and gentlemen. Wait and see. So we'll see what we can do. Bring it 6 o'clock, the news conference. Who knows? Maybe we'll break in live from somewhere else as well. We'll have to wait and see. Hey, and we just put up another good video today about, or it's going to be put up. Hank's going to finish it. Frank is going to finish it. So excited, all this breaking news. The whole Karen Reed thing is finally gone, thank God. And now we have Barry Morphew back. It just keeps on giving, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? All right. That's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching. Breaking news, Barry Morphew indicted for the death of his wife, Suzanne Morphew, back on Mother's Day of May of 2020. Oh, actually, May of 2021. I misspoke. There it is. Barry Morphew indicted, ladies and gentlemen. Barry Morphew indicted, first-degree murder. He's been arrested, going to be extradited from Arizona. I guess we'll see if he waives extradition to say, come on back, let's do this thing, or if he's somehow going to fight it. But only you can fight and say, I'm not Barry Morphew. That's really the only grounds. So I don't see that. He should want to get back as quickly as possible, because then he can address bond. And since, the law is basically changed, if you're not here in Colorado, you are entitled to a bond, although there's some changes that relates to the proof evident presumption. Great, since we no longer have the death penalty. But we'll see if he gets a bond or if he's going to sit in custody this time. Is he going to have the same attorneys? Iris Itan, Drew Nielsen, they've split up. Their firm split up. We'll have to wait and see. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you know where to come for the breaking news as it relates to Barry Morphew. Right here, we brought it to you first. Have a wonderful day. Talk to you later.